Welcome to Tales from the Museum. I'm your host, Jim Collette. In this first episode, I thought we'd talk a little bit about museums, especially this one, and what they're about. This museum's been around for some 85 years. And by the 1940s, as an article in the Midland Reporter-Telegram told us, they had over 5,000 items in the collection in the museum. Now, sadly, many of those items are no longer with us. Over the years, things got taken back, things got lost, probably a few things got stolen, which is always sad, but it happens. But museums are about trying to preserve a little bit about some specific topic. Maybe they're a museum about the art of a certain time, maybe they're a museum about a certain organization, maybe the museum, in this case, about a certain place. So we are the Midland County History Museum, and we're primarily about the history of Midland County, and the areas that immediately touch that, the folks that live maybe further out, but still this is their home and this is part of what their community is about. So what we should have in the collection should be things to help you understand what that history's been like. But that doesn't always happen. What do people give a museum? Do you have anything in your house you think belongs in a museum? A lot of times when people decide what they want to give us, they have something that's been in their family a long time. And so they live here, but the things they are bringing us were in their family maybe many generations before they came here. So does that really fit? Is that really part of our history that belongs to us? Maybe, maybe not. And then other people have all sorts of interesting things that they think are unusual, that maybe someone would want to see, or they're just a novelty, something they've kept or they've collected. So we have many interesting artifacts in this museum that we'll talk about in this series. We have things like the Pliska doors, the blacksmith doors, and we'll do a story on that sometime. We have all sorts of interesting things from the early days in our photograph collection, all sorts of neat photographs of what Midland looked like in those early days. And recently we acquired what is supposed to be the gate to the second courthouse, the stone courthouse that was built in the early 1900s. And is it or not? We'll see. And we also have some interesting things like the piano in the Brown Dorsey house. That we'll look at the story of that. But today, to kind of give you an idea of how things fit in a collection or how things get acquired, and we have to decide, do we really need to keep these or not? Do we need to deaccession, which is the word for get rid of those items from the collection, because they really don't have that much to do with it. We've actually received things that have been deaccessioned. We have a key to the city that once belonged to Bob Hope, but the Bob Hope Museum felt that was not something they needed particularly to keep, because I suspect Bob had quite a few keys to quite a few cities over time. So let's look at one particular item that we have. So here's one item we have. It's been in the museum as long as I've worked with the museum. Have any idea what it is? Well, it says these items were found in chickens' gizzards and presented to the museum by Doran's Produce Company. Now, when we researched it a little bit, we found out that the Doran brothers, Jack and R.J. Doran, had a produce company that kind of moved around on the edge of town. And according to the 1947 guide that we found, they had dressed poultry, eggs, and general produce. So they worked a lot with chickens. And I suppose as they slaughtered those chickens, they found all these things in their gizzards, and someone must have been tossing them in a box, and they kept collecting them. And maybe after they closed down, probably sometime in the 1950s, they decided, that's pretty cool, we bet the museum would like to have that. And so whoever was operating the museum said, sure. And it's been in the museum ever since. It's even been on display sometimes. So if we take a look inside to see what's there a little bit. See what you see. What a collection. So here's my question. Remember Indiana Jones? When he tells the bad guys, that belongs in a museum. Well, here's my question. Does this belong in our museum? Does it tell us enough about Midland's history? Okay, it's a company that was here in the early years. Like so many companies, it was a time when there was a lot more fresh produce and all produced locally instead of brought in. So yeah, those things are kind of useful. I suppose if we took this out and dumped it out and analyzed it, we might get some idea of the kind of stuff that would be floating around in that time period that might be unique. Certainly quite a few marbles there, for example. But I don't know that it really tells us a whole lot. And so as we work in a museum, one of the things we have to be careful about, especially when items get a lot larger than this, is really, do we need this in our collection? And if we do, why? What does it really tell us about Midland and life in Midland County in any particular time period? Because that's what the museum is primarily about. So next time you're in a museum, pay attention to the title of the museum, the name of the museum, and somewhere early on they should give you some idea of what this museum is about. County museums, for example, are pretty obviously what they're about. And then as you go through the collection, see how good a job they did of helping you kind of step into the past of that museum. And it's okay to have a little bit of weird and exotic stuff, I think. Probably stored in the back, and that's why a lot of these things will end up in tails, but probably not out there on the display shelves. But anyway, we will be looking at things that have a lot more relevance to our history. But I kind of think these kind of things don't need to be in the museum. But at the same time, part of me says, well, it's kind of fun. And maybe someday we'll have an oddities corner or something like that. So next time, we'll be looking at some other artifact from the museum. Hope you'll join us again for the next episode of Tales from the Museum.